NBA free agency has finished up for 2023, which means, of course, it is time for winners and losers. We get to talk about which teams did the best, which teams did the worst, who set themselves up well for the future. And I think the biggest winner of the entirety of 2023 NBA free agency is the LA Lakers, and that's where we're going to begin today. This is a team that, as free agency was progressing, I thought I knew what direction they were going in. We saw them bring in Rui. We saw them bring back D'Angelo Russell. We saw them bring in Gabe Vincent. I was like, oh, there's a big Austin Reeves contract out there. They're not going to be able to retain Austin Reeves, so they're preparing to not bring him back. And then all of a sudden, Austin Reeves comes back on, yes, the maximum that the Lakers could offer him, I think is 4 years, 54, with all this other stuff in there that's really good for Reeves. But I honestly thought they were going to have to match a bigger offer than that from another team around the league, whether it be San Antonio, Houston, Detroit, whatever the case may be. One of these big cap-based teams could have just made the Lakers pay more for Austin Reeves, and they didn't do that. But it's not just that. It's not just the guards. Like, Gabe Vincent is good. He's an upgrade over Dennis Schroeder. Bringing back D'Lo, even though I'm not a big D'Lo guy, it wasn't a big price. It wasn't a long-term deal. That's totally fine. I like the fact that they brought Reeves back at the number that they did, but it's not just the stuff with the guards, because this is a team in the Lakers that has relied heavily on their two stars for their success. But this offseason, they've really added a ton of depth. As I mentioned, Vincent, but also Jackson Hayes could be an interesting bench big. Cam Reddish, Taurean Prince, these are relatively high upside, still kind of young wings, guys that can actually go out there and score and defend and shoot a little bit. And on a night-to-night basis, there's going to be nights where Cam Reddish is just not good or Taurean Prince just isn't good. But as long as you have a couple of these wings on your roster that may or may not play well on a particular night, that can help you kind of put together and formulate a good rotation. The Lakers did a fantastic job in free agency with limited tools with which to work with. The only one that I don't really like that much is Rui. 17 a year for Rui. I know it's only 3 years. That's a lot. Like, this is a guy that the Wizards couldn't even get a first-round pick for at the trade deadline as a former top 10 pick. That shows you where his value was. But ultimately, it's only a 3-year deal. There was, I guess, some money, some offers out there for Rui. They really wanted to retain him after trading for him midseason. I don't have a gigantic issue with it, but if I was to, say anything negative about anything in free agency for the Lakers, it would be that Rui contract is a bit much for me. Now we go over to the losers category, and we got to talk about the Portland Trailblazers. There's one big reason, and the Damian Lillard trade request news does not change my opinion on this whatsoever. So before Dame requested a trade, I did a video talking about how the Jeremy Grant contract was the worst contract of the entirety of free agency. Like, the Fred VanVleet thing was a lot of money. The Dillon Brooks contract, that's a lot of money. We're going to talk about the Rockets later, but Portland giving Jeremy Grant 5 years, 160, even if Dame was going to stay on the team, was just too much. It's very simple. He's not worth that. He's not worth close to that. Yes, he's good. He can guard. He's a good two-way player, relatively efficient offensive player. I get all that stuff, but he turns 30 in March, and you gave him a 5-year contract worth over $30 million a year. And that's bad for two reasons. One, he's not worth that much money, and it's too much. Two, it limits what you can get in a trade down the road, because with or without Dame, you probably were going to try and trade Jeremy Grant at some point on that contract. So that was before Dame requested a trade. Then a day later, after a 5-year, $160 million contract, Damian Lillard requests a trade, which just makes this so much worse. When they brought back Jeremy Grant, when they offered him that much money, you had to think that they did it thinking that Damian Lillard was going to return to the team, and that was going to be a critical piece of it. You could not lose Jeremy Grant in free agency. You could not go back to Damian Lillard and say, hey, by the way, our team is now significantly worse. You still want to come back, right? You couldn't do that. So they had to give him this much money, but now that Dame wants out, it is just a complete catastrophe of a contract. Back to the winner's side now, and a bit of an under-the-radar team for me, and that is the Milwaukee Bucks. You might be wondering, Tucker, what did Milwaukee do in free agency that makes them a winner? Well, it's kind of boring, but they brought back their guys. There was a real possibility that the Bucks were going to lose one, if not both, of Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez this offseason. There were suitors for each of those guys. I think there were scenarios in which Sacramento and Dallas got really interested in bringing in Chris Middleton on a big contract. If Dallas rescinded the rights to Kyrie and Sacramento created salary cap space, I think those two teams were thinking about making a run at Chris Middleton. Ultimately, he comes back to Milwaukee on a deal that's really not that expensive, given how good he's been over the last couple of seasons, last season being the exception because of the injury stuff. And then Brook Lopez, I was pretty convinced that he was going to be going to the Houston Rockets, that they were going to give him a big 2 or 3 year contract that he just wasn't going to be able to turn down, but ultimately they're able to return him as well. Now, retain him as well, I should say. Now, I do still have concerns, over the next couple of seasons about the aging core around Giannis, Lopez, Middleton. Holiday's a free agent next offseason, and he's talked about maybe even retiring when that contract is over. All these guys are getting older. They're all now going to be very expensive, and that is still a concern for me 100%. But specifically in terms of this free agency period, just keeping the group together after a disastrous end to the season, very easily Milwaukee's team could have kind of fallen apart here, and they didn't, and that is a big win for them. Back to the loser side, the Toronto Raptors. There's two reasons for this one. One, the Fred VanVleet thing, which again, we're going to talk about later. Obviously, it was too much money for Toronto to retain him. Houston having that much cap space just outbid them for what Fred VanVleet wanted. That makes total 100 complete sense, but it is still just tough to lose that guy. They replaced him with Dennis Schroeder, but Dennis Schroeder is just significantly worse than VanVleet, and it's going to make their basketball team significantly worse next year. That's really all there is to it, and it's really tough to lose that guy. But I also am not a big fan of the Jakob Poeltl contract. 4 years, 80 is kind of a lot for a non-all-star big, and I know the cap is going to be going up. I'm sure there's going to be comments in this video about how, oh my gosh, the salary cap is going to keep going up. These contracts aren't going to be that bad. Yeah, that's true, but this is still a lot of money for Jakob Poeltl. Jakob Poeltl's good. Like, he's a very, very good defender, someone that Toronto desperately needs on their roster. They traded for him mid-season, but just generally speaking, when you go and look around the league at the salary at the center position, $20 million is a lot for someone that is not going to be contending for all-star teams, and it's pretty easy to find replacement level centers at the 5 spot as well if you really wanted to go a much cheaper route. But that in combination with the VanVleet loss, I think makes them losers in free agency this year. Back now to the winner's side, the Washington Wizards. I don't know if I've ever put the Wizards in the winner's column of anything, honestly. I've been doing this for 5 years. I don't think I've ever put the Washington Wizards in the winners column of free agency or the draft or really anything, but I'm going to put them there now. And there's one big reason, and this is going to be controversial, and that's the Kyle Kuzma contract. Everybody's going to be saying, oh my gosh, Kyle Kuzma's overpaid. This is way too much money. Why is Washington doing this? And because it's the Wizards, they're going to make fun of them. You're not wrong. Kyle Kuzma is overpaid. It's too much money for him in terms of the value he's providing to your team. He's not as young as maybe you'd think he is initially. However, it doesn't really matter that he's overpaid. The biggest thing for Washington this entire offseason is to add assets to their team and retain the assets that they already had. So they traded away Kristaps Porzingis, got some stuff back. They traded away Bradley Beal, got some stuff back. They've got Jordan Poole on the roster now in exchange for Chris Paul. Let's turn him into an asset. And Kyle Kuzma, say what you want about the contract. A year, 2 years from now, as the contract continues to expire, as he puts up really big numbers in Washington, he will be a trade asset. He will be someone that they could probably get a first-round pick for a year, 2, 3 years from now as that contract continues to expire. And he's just a good player. He's not great. He's not all-star level, but he's good. He's improved. And he's going to put up some really good numbers in Washington and be really enticing to a couple of different teams around the league. Even on that contract, yes, it's too much, but the options here were let Kyle Kuzma leave in free agency and get nothing for him, or overpay him in this offseason, wait a year to trade him and get actual value in exchange for him. And this obviously is the much better option. Washington's not trying to be good anytime soon anyway, so taking up salary cap space with players like Kuzma and Jordan Poole and then trading them later is absolutely the right move. You retain the player, you retain the asset, and it all works out well for Washington. Last up now, the biggest loser, and that is the Houston Rockets. Now, in the context of the Kuzma stuff that I just talked about, some of these contracts might not seem so bad, right? But overall, what they did with their roster in the entirety of free agency, trading away some relatively decent and interesting, young players, Ty Washington, like there was just some weird stuff going on with their roster. I honestly don't hate the VanVleet thing. I talked about this in a different video. He's going to organize them. He's going to be a leader for them, brings championship experience. All that stuff is good stuff. I don't love the number. It's obviously too much money, but ultimately for Houston, it's not that big a deal. The Dillon Brooks one, though, I just don't understand. It is too much money, but similar to the VanVleet thing, like it's not a huge deal to spend that much money on him because you kind of have to spend the money on somebody. I personally, if I had a young core, if I had a group of young players that I was really excited about, no disrespect to Dillon Brooks, I wouldn't want him anywhere remotely close to my young players. I just wouldn't. Like, there are some positive leadership things that he brings to the table, but he's just too volatile. He's going to take too many shots, and he just brings this presence to my team that I'm not sure that I really want around my young guys, and I certainly don't don't want him around for $20 million a year over 4 years. One of the reasons that the Van Vliet thing is not that big of a deal is because it's relatively short. It's 3 years with an option in the third year. Dylan Brooks for 4 years, $20 million every single year. That for me is just too much. Also, I like Jacques Landale. 4 years, 32 is probably too much for him as well. Overall, it just feels like Houston maybe had a primary plan and then went to plan B, and plan B was really overspend on some players that, yes, are going to make them better, but it's unlikely they're going to be a play-in team, and it's probably going to limit the development of some of their younger players at certain points because of all these veterans that they brought in. To me, when you're looking at each of these contracts individually, I probably wouldn't have done any of them except for maybe the Van Vliet one. And those are my biggest winners and losers of 2023 NBA free agency. Let me know down in the comment section below who you would have put in the video, and I'll see y'all next time.